Welcome to part 2 of IFM domain controller installations. Now, if you remember in part 1, if you've already seen that video, I kind of gave you the background on what an IFM domain controller installation is, why we want to do it, what advantages it gives us, and all those sorts of things. Now, here in part 2, I want to take you through the steps, step by step, on how you would pull one of these things off. Okay, now pulling one of these things off is a Southern technical term for making this operational in the real world. Now, the first thing you want to do is understand that you're going to create the installation media on a domain controller in the domain where you're going to be installing or promoting that new domain controller. So you want to go physically to a domain controller in the same domain, and you want to create this installation media. First thing you're going to do is open a command prompt as an administrator, and you'll also hear this called opening a command prompt with elevated permissions. And really what you want to do is go to the command prompt icon, either out there on the start menu in Windows Server 2012 or in administrative tools, right click on it and say run as administrator, and you're at elevated permissions. Now at the command prompt, you just want to type ntdsutil, and then you're going to get an ntdsutil prompt, and you're going to type activate instance ntds. And back at the ntdsutil prompt, you're going to type IFM, okay? Install from media. Then at the IFM prompt, you're going to type the command for the type of installation media you want to create. Now here, I'll refer you out to TechNet. Just go do a search on IFM installation, and you can find all of these commands out there. But just as an example, I'll show you on that domain controller. We've gone through this process. We finally got down to the IFM area. We're going to type create full. So this is going to be a full writable copy. Then we're going to put the location of where we want to put this installation media information. Well, we're going to put it on the C drive in whatever folder name we put. Okay, it could be IM files, something like that. Then I want to copy that C:IM files folder, whatever. Copy that installation media I just created to the destination domain controller. Keep in mind, they'll confuse you with the steps here because that destination domain controller is not a domain controller yet. What they really should say, they don't consult with me on these things, you understand. They should say copy the installation media to the machine that's going to be promoted to a domain controller. Now let's just move right along. So what I want to do then is, on the machine that I'm going to install as a domain controller in my remote location, use Server Manager and install the Active Directory Domain Services role. Once that role has been installed and it's gone through all the processes and you've answered all their questions if there are any prerequisites have been added if they're needed, you will select, you're going to notice on that very last page when it's telling you that the role was installed successfully, it's going to tell you there is some configuration work that still needs to be done, something like that. You will also see a link when you install the ADDS role that says promote this server to a domain controller. And you will click that link. Keep in mind, Windows Server 2008 and before, we ran DC promo to promote the server. Can't do that anymore on Windows Server 2012, so you'll have to select this link and it will start the process. Now you're just going to answer the questions, configure the settings. They'll be pretty straightforward until you reach the screen that says, or the dialog box that says additional options. When you get there, you want to select install from media. Sound familiar? And it'll ask you where are the files, and you're just going to point it to the IFM media folder you created earlier. Then you'll just complete the remaining steps, reboot the server, then remove that folder containing the IFM media. And here's why. From the time you make this IFM media to the time you actually use that to install on a domain controller and promote it into the domain in a remote location needs to be as soon as possible, because this thing's still a functioning domain controller. It's still going to check with other domain controllers in the domain and see if it needs to replicate anything. If you create your IFM media and wait 3 weeks, there's going to be a lot of changes, and you're still going to have to replicate those 3 weeks worth of changes across that slow link. So do it as quickly as possible, and then remove that folder. You do not want anybody coming back later using the wrong IFM media folder to promote that thing for whatever bizarre reason, and you know how many bizarre things happen out there in the real world. So that's the steps. I hope this helps you to really kind of get a grip on what IFM domain controller installations are, the steps to go through it. If you have time, play with this in the real world before you take the exam. But I've given you enough information here. You should be able to navigate the questions satisfactorily on the exam when it comes to IFM domain controller installations.